I'm Tracy Walsh, 32 years old, a woman who thought she had grown used to being overlooked by her family, until one night changed everything. That night was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary held at a small community hall in Boise. It should have been a warm and loving evening, but for me, it became the lowest point in our family dynamic. As everyone laughed and chatted, my mother placed an empty plate in front of me, her smile cold as ice. "You should have brought snacks." "We won't order for you," she said, her tone light but dripping with contempt. Beside her, my sister savored a $230 lobster and steak, her smug expression silently reminding me of where I stood. My father chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement, and the entire table erupted in laughter, everyone except me. I sat there gripping the edge of my chair, my face burning with humiliation and anger. They expected me to smile again, to swallow it like I always did. My sister leaned back, slicing her steak as she basked in the glow of their praise, and my mother's voice pierced the air again, sharp and deliberate. "Tracy, don't make a scene." But this time, I wasn't the same obedient Tracy they thought I was. Something inside me snapped after years of being treated as less. I stood up, my hands trembling but my gaze steady, and I announced something that made every fork freeze midair. The laughter stopped instantly, smug smiles disappeared, and I saw the shock widen in my sister's eyes. For the first time in my life, every eye in the room was on me, not out of pity, but out of stunned disbelief. What I was about to say would change everything, and from that moment on, no one at that table could enjoy their meal again. Before we continue with the rest of my story, leave a comment and tell me what time is it where you are and which city are you watching from. I'd love to know how far my story has reached. 2 days before the anniversary party, I was juggling a dozen tasks to make my parents' 30th wedding celebration perfect. Fresh off a divorce, I was still piecing my life back together, yet I booked the Boise Community Hall, ordered white lilies, and coordinated catering for 50 guests. My mother, Patricia, barely acknowledged my efforts, her focus glued to her phone, texting about decorations. I didn't expect a thank you, but her indifference stung. Meanwhile, my sister Brenda breezed in, flaunting a new designer purse my parents had gifted her. They'd paid off her car loan last month too, while I was stuck covering their electricity and water bills every month without a word of gratitude. Brenda, a few years older than me, soaked up their praise like it was her birthright, her laughter filling the house as my father Edward nodded approvingly. I kept my head down, folding napkins for the party, but the weight of their favoritism pressed harder each day. I'd been paying their internet and grocery bills for years, ever since I moved back home to stabilize my finances. Yet they never once offered to chip in, or even recognized my contributions. Instead, Patricia would beam at Brenda's stories of her banking job while Edward clapped her on the back for landing a big client. My role, invisible like always. That evening, as I scrubbed dishes in the kitchen, my phone pinged with an email from Brian Parker, a former colleague from my office job. His message was short but chilling. He'd heard rumors at the old firm that Patricia had been siphoning money from a family investment fund years ago. He didn't have proof, just whispers from a retired accountant who'd seen questionable transfers. My stomach churned. Was that why they leaned on me for bills? Were they hiding something bigger? I waited until Patricia was out of earshot and cornered Edward in the living room. "Why am I always the one paying for everything?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the TV. "You've got a job, don't you? It's just family helping family." His dismissal hit like a slap. I pressed further, asking about the family fund Brian mentioned. Edward's face tightened and he muttered, "Don't stir up trouble." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there, my hands clenched. The email from Brian kept gnawing at me. I reread it, my mind racing. Patricia had always been cagey about money, redirecting questions with a smile or a quick subject change. Brenda's lavish gifts, the paid-off loans, none of it added up. I'd been their financial crutch, yet they treated me like an outsider. The more I thought about it, the more I felt used like a pawn in some game I didn't understand. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom, I couldn't shake the suspicion that Patricia was hiding something dark. Edward's refusal to talk only deepened my unease. I wasn't just covering their bills, I was footing the cost of their lies. As I packed my bag for the party, I resolved to watch them closely. Something was off, and Brian's email was the first crack in their facade. I didn't know what I'd uncover, but I was done being their doormat. The party would be more than a celebration. It would be the start of my fight for answers. The morning of the party, I arrived at the Boise Community Hall before sunrise, checking every detail to ensure my parents' 30th anniversary celebration went off without a hitch. I adjusted tablecloths, arranged centerpieces, and confirmed the caterer's delivery of appetizers and entrees. I'd already paid a third of the venue's cost from my savings, a fact my mother Patricia hadn't mentioned when she called to confirm the guest list. Her voice over the phone was all business, no warmth, as if my hours of work were expected, not appreciated. I shook it off, focusing on the task, but the sting of being overlooked lingered. Back at home, Patricia was fussing over the seating chart while Brenda sauntered in a glittering new necklace dangling from her neck. "Mom and Dad got me this for landing that promotion," she said, her smile smug as she adjusted the chain. I nodded, my jaw tight, knowing I'd never received so much as a thank you for covering their utility bills. My parents had poured money into Brenda's life, her car, her debts, while I footed their household expenses without a second glance. When I mentioned the catering deposit I'd covered, Patricia cut me off. "You need to pay the full bill for the party," she said, her tone sharp. "It's your responsibility as family." I blinked, stunned, my hands pausing over a stack of napkins. "I already paid a chunk," I said, my voice rising. "Why is it always me?" My father overheard and let out a dry laugh from the couch. "You're too sensitive," he said, waving a hand like my complaint was a fly to swat away. Brenda smirked, twirling her necklace, not bothering to chime in. The dismissal burned. I'd spent weeks planning dipping into my account to make their day special, yet they acted like it was nothing. I retreated to the kitchen, my chest tight, feeling like an outsider in my own family. Brenda's necklace gleamed in my mind, a symbol of their favoritism, while my contributions were brushed aside. I wanted to confront them, to demand why Brenda got gifts while I got demands, but I held back, knowing it'd spark a fight before the party. That afternoon, as I loaded chairs into my car for the hall, my phone rang. It was Susan, our neighbor, her voice low and cautious. She'd overheard Patricia at a book club bragging about how Brenda was thriving thanks to their support. "She didn't mention you once," Susan said, her tone apologetic. "All she talked about was Brenda's promotion, her new car, how they're so proud." My grip tightened on the phone. Patricia's boasts about Brenda while ignoring my sacrifices felt like a knife twisting deeper. Susan hesitated, then added, "I just thought you should know how she talks when you're not around." The call ended, but Susan's words echoed. I stood by my car, the stack of chairs forgotten, as anger simmered. Patricia's demand for me to pay the entire bill, Edward's laugh, Brenda's smugness, it all collided. I wasn't just overlooked. I was erased. The muffle of unfairness I'd pushed down for years was now a roar. I drove to the hall, my hands shaking, resolving to face them tonight. This wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about years of being taken for granted. Something had to give. As the party began, I took my seat at the family table. My stomach knotted from the morning's frustrations. The Boise Community Hall hummed with 50 guests, their chatter and clinking glasses filling the air. I scanned the room, hoping for a moment of acknowledgement, but Patricia was busy greeting an old friend, her smile wide as she recounted stories of their youth. Edward stood nearby, laughing with a cousin about his old furniture store days, his voice booming over the crowd. Brenda, seated across from me, was holding court, regaling a group of relatives with tales of her latest banking success. Her designer dress caught the light, a gift from Patricia and Edward, no doubt. I adjusted my napkin, feeling like a stranger at my own parents' 30th anniversary celebration, my weeks of planning invisible to everyone. Patricia called me over to pour wine for a guest, her tone clipped as if I were staff, not family. I complied, biting back a retort, but the slight stung. As I returned to my seat, Brenda leaned toward a cousin, boasting about her promotion, her voice loud enough to carry. "They're so proud of me," she said, glancing at Patricia, who nodded enthusiastically. Edward chimed in. "Brenda's always been a star." I gripped my glass, their praise for her echoing against the silence they offered me. I'd been paying their bills for years, electricity, groceries, internet. Yet here I was, pouring wine while they celebrated her. The unfairness simmered, a quiet anger building in my chest. I tried to join the conversation, mentioning the catering I'd arranged, but Patricia waved me off, turning to compliment Brenda's choice of earrings. Edward didn't even glance my way, too busy toasting a neighbor. The dismissal felt like a weight pressing harder with every laugh that wasn't for me. I stared at my empty place, setting no plate, no food, just a fork and a glass. Then Patricia leaned across the table, her eyes glinting, and slid an empty plate in front of me. "You should have brought snacks," she said, her voice sharp with mockery. "We didn't order anything for you." The table burst into chuckles, and Brenda, savoring a $230 lobster and steak, flashed a smug grin, her fork gleaming as she took another bite. The words cut deep, a public jab that echoed years of being sidelined. Edward beamed at Brenda, saying, "That's our Brenda, always a class act." Patricia nodded, her eyes sparkling as she praised Brenda's entree choice. My fingers curled into fists beneath the table, the sting of their favoritism overwhelming. Brenda's smirk widened as she sliced her steak, as if my humiliation was part of the meal. The guests' laughter faded into a dull roar, their clinking glasses a backdrop to my rising anger. Then Patricia spoke again, her tone casual but firm. "Tracy, you're covering the bill for this, right?" Edward nodded, his expression smug. "Family pulls their weight," he said, not meeting my eyes. The audacity of it, expecting me to pay for their lavish party after ignoring my contributions, snapped something inside me. I'd swallowed their disregard for too long, always the one to sacrifice while they fawned over Brenda. My hands shook as I pushed my chair back, the screech silencing the table. I stood, my voice steady, but loud. "Patricia, Edward," I said, locking eyes with them, "you're paying for this party yourselves, and I'm done covering your bills, every single one." The room froze. Forks hovered, glasses stilled, and every head turned. Brenda's grin vanished, replaced by a piercing glare, her lips parting as if to retort. Patricia's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Tracy, sit down," she hissed, but I didn't move. Edward's smugness faltered, his brow creasing as he leaned forward, caught off guard. The guests shifted, their whispers fading into a tense hush. Brenda set her fork down, her stare icy, as if I'd broken an unspoken rule. The air grew heavy, the celebration's warmth replaced by a chill. I stood taller, my pulse racing, but my resolve unshaken. Their entitlement had pushed me too far. I'd carried their financial burdens for years, believing it was my duty. But this moment, the empty plate, the demand for payment, Brenda's smugness made it clear. I wasn't just done paying, I was done being their doormat. Patricia opened her mouth, likely to scold, but I raised a hand. "No more," I said, my voice firm. "You've taken enough." Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering, others staring wide-eyed. Brenda's glare held, but I saw unease in her eyes. Edward coughed, trying to regain control, but his confidence was gone. Patricia's lips pressed thin, her hands clutching her napkin. Their perfect family facade was crumbling, and I was the one unraveling it. I sat down, my heart pounding, knowing I'd drawn a line that changed everything. Their smugness had shattered, and for the first time I felt the power of my own voice. The next morning, I packed my suitcase in the quiet of my old bedroom, each folded shirt a step toward leaving. Downstairs, Patricia stood in the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face set in a scowl. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone," she said, her voice low and sharp. "If you can't respect this family, you need to leave." Edward, leaning against the counter, nodded in agreement, his eyes fixed on his coffee mug. "You caused a scene, Tracy?" he said, his tone cold. "We don't need that kind of trouble here." I stood in the doorway, my suitcase handle biting into my palm, and faced them. "I've done nothing but support you," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "I paid your bills, planned your party, and got nothing but mockery in return." Patricia's scowl deepened and she snapped, "You're exaggerating. We've always been there for you." Edward didn't look up, just stirred his coffee as if my words were irrelevant. Their dismissal stung, but I'd expected it. Years of being overlooked had hardened me to their indifference. Brenda appeared from the living room, her expression hard. "You're so selfish, Tracy," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You don't appreciate everything Mom and Dad have done for you?" I stared at her, stunned by the accusation. "Appreciate what?" I shot back. "Paying your car loan while I cover their groceries. Getting a plate shoved in my face while you're praised." Brenda's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond, just folded her arms and stood beside Patricia as if choosing sides. The room felt smaller, the air thick with their united front against me. I turned away, my throat tight, and stepped outside to clear my head. Sitting on the porch, I dialed Ellen, my best friend, my hands trembling as I recounted the party, the empty plate, and the morning's ultimatum. Ellen listened quietly, her voice warm when she finally spoke. "Tracy, you don't deserve this," she said. "They've taken you for granted for too long." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the edge of doubt. She paused, then added, "You should go to Ruth's place. She's had her own issues with Patricia, she'll understand." Ruth, my aunt, had distanced herself from Patricia years ago after a falling out over family money. The idea sparked a flicker of hope. I thanked Ellen, her support grounding me, and hung up. Back inside, I faced Patricia and Edward one last time. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice firm. "You can handle your own expenses from now on." Patricia's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Edward muttered, "You'll regret this," but his words lacked conviction. Brenda scoffed, shaking her head as if my decision was a personal affront. I didn't argue. I'd said enough. Grabbing my suitcase, I packed a few essentials, clothes, a photo of my late grandmother, my laptop, and walked out the door. The Boise morning was crisp, the street quiet as I loaded my car. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. Leaving wasn't just about walking away from their house, it was about reclaiming my life. I'd spent years tethered to their expectations, believing I owed them my support. But their rejection, their demand that I leave, had freed me. I drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, my mind set on Ruth's place across town. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time I felt unburdened, ready to build a life where I wasn't invisible. By evening, I knocked on Ruth's door, my suitcase heavy in my hand. She welcomed me into her cozy Boise apartment, her warm smile a stark contrast to the coldness I'd left behind. Sitting at her kitchen table, I poured out the story of the anniversary party, the empty plate, Patricia's mockery, the demand to pay for everything, and my decision to cut them off. Ruth listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding, nodding, as I described years of being overshadowed by Brenda. "You've carried too much for too long," she said, her voice steady. "It's time you put yourself first." Her words lifted a weight from my shoulders, the relief of being heard washing over me. Ruth stood retrieving a box of old family documents from a closet. "I've kept these since my falling out with Patricia," she said, sifting through faded papers. She pulled out a folder labeled Family Trust and spread its contents across the table. As we examined the pages, my breath caught. There, among the financial records, was a transfer document dated years ago bearing my grandmother's signature, or what looked like it. Ruth's face tightened. "This isn't her handwriting," she said, pointing to the uneven loops. "Patricia forged it to pull money from the trust." My heart raced. The Kui Jiao Tu meant for the whole family had been drained, and Patricia's name was tied to every withdrawal. Before I could process the discovery, my phone pinged with an email from Ellen. She'd dug into Patricia's old company records after our call, pulling strings with a former colleague. Attached were scanned ledgers from Patricia's time as a financial officer, showing unauthorized transfers to an account linked to her name. "It's enough to prove she misappropriated funds," Ellen wrote. I stared at the screen, the evidence aligning with Ruth's findings. Patricia hadn't just favored Brenda, she'd betrayed the entire family. The betrayal stung, but it also sharpened my resolve. I wasn't just walking away, I was uncovering the truth. Ruth didn't hesitate. "We need to take this to a lawyer," she said, already dialing Tom Reynolds, a lawyer she'd known for years. Tom listened as Ruth explained the forged signature and Ellen's documents, his voice calm but serious over the speakerphone. "This is grounds for a lawsuit," he said. "We can file for fraud and demand an audit of the trust." He outlined the steps, gathering more evidence, drafting a complaint, and serving Patricia with papers. Ruth nodded, her determination infectious. "We'll hold her accountable," she said, looking at me. I agreed, my voice firm, knowing this was bigger than my personal grievances. As Ruth and Tom planned, my phone buzzed again. A text from Stephen, Brenda's husband, popped up. "Tracy, please don't escalate this. You're tearing the family apart." His words carried a hint of desperation, but they only fueled my anger. Stephen hadn't been at the party, hadn't seen the empty plate or heard Patricia's demands. "I'm done protecting them," I texted back, my fingers steady. They made their choices. I hit send, feeling a surge of conviction. Patricia's actions weren't just unfair, they were illegal, and I wouldn't back down. Ruth squeezed my hand, her eyes fierce. "You're doing the right thing," she said. The documents on the table, Ellen's email and Tom's plan, formed a path forward. The forged signature was the final piece, proof that Patricia's betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. I wasn't just reclaiming my life, I was fighting for justice. As night settled over Boise, I felt a quiet strength, ready to face whatever came next. A week later, my phone buzzed with messages as I settled into Ruth's spare room. Patricia's text was the first to catch my eye. "You're destroying this family with your lawsuit. Drop it now." Her words carried the same sharp edge she'd used at the party, but they no longer shook me. I deleted the message, my resolve firm. On social media, Brenda had posted a scathing rant calling me a traitor and selfish for suing our mother. Her followers piled on, their comments stinging but predictable. I scrolled past, refusing to engage. Their attempts to guilt me only strengthened my determination to see this through. The courtroom in Boise was stark, its wooden benches filled with a small crowd as the hearing began. Ruth stood tall, presenting the forged trust document and Ellen's ledgers to the judge. Her voice was steady, detailing how Patricia had siphoned funds meant for the family. The judge's face remained impassive, but when Ruth showed the mismatched signatures, a murmur rippled through the room. Patricia, seated across the aisle, stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. The bank's representative confirmed they'd frozen her accounts pending the investigation, a move that hit her like a visible blow. I sat beside Ruth, my heart steady, knowing we'd exposed the truth. After the hearing, I walked to a nearby coffee shop, needing a moment to breathe. Edward was waiting there, his face lined with worry. "Tracy, let's talk," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "This lawsuit is tearing us apart. Can't we settle this as a family?" His plea caught me off guard, but it felt hollow. I thought of the years I'd paid their bills, the empty plate at the party, the silence when I needed support. "You had your chance to be fair," I said, my tone even. "I'm done carrying you all." Edward's shoulders slumped, and he looked away, no counter to offer. I left the shop, my steps lighter, unburdened by his request. Back at Ruth's, I found a letter from the bank waiting on the kitchen table. It confirmed the trust funds had been restored to Ruth's name, a victory that felt like a long overdue correction. Ruth hugged me, her eyes bright. "We did it," she said, her voice thick with relief. "The money wasn't just hers, It was a piece of our family's legacy stolen and now reclaimed. I nodded, a quiet pride settling in. Patricia's betrayal had been laid bare, and I'd stood my ground through it all. The courtroom that day wasn't just about money, it was about justice. Patricia's messages, Brenda's posts, Edward's plea, they couldn't undo the truth. I'd fought for what was right, and for the first time I felt truly free from their shadow. 6 months later, I unlocked my new apartment in Boise, the key, a small symbol of my fresh start. The space was modest, but mine filled with light, and the quiet promise of independence. I'd cut off all contact with Patricia, Edward, and Brenda, blocking their numbers and ignoring their attempts to reach me. My phone, once a constant source of their demands, now stayed silent, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I arranged my few belongings, a bookshelf, a second-hand couch, a photo of my late grandmother, and let the weight of the past slip away. Word reached me through Ruth that Patricia and Edward had lost their house. The lawsuit's fallout left them bankrupt, their savings drained by legal fees and the frozen accounts. They'd moved into a cramped rental across town, a far cry from the home I'd once helped sustain. I felt no satisfaction, only a distant ache for what could have been. Their choices had led them here, just as mine had led me to this new beginning. Brenda's life had unraveled too. Ruth heard from a mutual friend that Brenda had been let go from her bank job, her reputation tarnished after the trust fund scandal. She and Stephen, along with their kids, were now squeezed into his parents' small home, a stark contrast to her once glamorous lifestyle. I didn't dwell on her downfall. It was a consequence of her complicity, not my revenge. I'd moved beyond their world, focused on building my own. Ruth called me one afternoon, her voice warm but serious. "I'm putting you in charge of the family trust," she said. "You've earned it." The restored funds, now safely in her name, needed someone steady to manage them, and she trusted me. I accepted, grateful for her faith. The trust's income gave me a financial cushion, letting me cover rent and start a savings plan without the burden of supporting others. For the first time, I was building a future on my terms, not theirs. As I settled into my new life, I realized family isn't defined by blood, but by respect. Ruth's support, unlike Patricia's demands or Brenda's disdain, showed me what true connection meant. I'd spent years chasing approval from people who never valued me, but now I saw my worth. Standing up at the party in court and by walking away had set me free. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? Share below, and let's talk about finding strength in letting go.